Well, now I want to turn to Greg Cassidy. And Greg is, as you know, is building the firehouse that's a kit from Motrak Models. So Greg, welcome.
Thank you, Jim. Let me pull it on up here. I don't think that Gary realized that we were both going to be talking about diamond shingles tonight, but we are. So we're at week 4 of building our Alton fire station from Motrak Models. And as you've seen before, I'll be building the S-scale model. Mine's going to be a demo model that will be shown. I'm mostly building it the same way the instructions are. Tonight we'll be shingling the roof and painting the base and then installing the roof. And there are the diamond shingles that come with the kit. In addition to 2 sets of shingles, you also get a couple strips for the ridge cap and a couple strips for your starter row. I started off easily by assembling the tower roof. You get this little punch out, which is laser cut. And what you do is turn it over. I cut 4 pieces of masking tape that I then used to put all 4 corners together. These were already hinged, but I wanted to make them strong. And then when I put the 4th piece on, you get yourself a little tower cap. Once it's put together in this shape, it should fit right on top of the tower that we built earlier. After I had it put together, I ran some super glue down all 4 of the seams just to make sure it would hold together. Then I started to turn towards the shingles. The first thing I wanted to do was paint them. Now, I usually will do some type of streaking. Sometimes I do it with a Copic marker. This time I decided to use an airbrush. So I started off with a couple shades of gray. I first put down a light gray base over almost all of it, and then added some darker gray streaks. Then I came back with some tan streaks and some even darker streaks. And once the whole thing is put together, the streaks disappear and you just get a variety in your shingles. So then I started cutting them out. These are the starter strips, and I cut them out with approximately the angle that they were going to be used for on the tower roof. And this is how I apply my starter strips. And this is the same thing you'll do in any shingling, whether you're doing 3-tab or anything. I first put down the starter strips, and I used canopy glue for attaching all of my shingles. And then I cut out the single row of shingles and started to apply them. I cut the end of it so that it was again at the approximate angle of the tower. Then I cut the other end so that it would fit between the 2 edges. Now, when you glue this down, he has lines cut on the roof. Mine didn't exactly line up, but it was close enough that I could use them to follow it. But the important thing is to have the bottom edge of your diamonds right on the very edge of the roof. And I would apply a little bit of the canopy glue on the back. I have one of those bottles that has a metal nozzle on it that makes this easy. And then I just started working my way around the roof. You could also go up, it's your choice. You don't have to be real concerned about the edge here where they meet, because we're going to have a ridge cap come down that. Now, one of the tricks to putting on diamond shingles is to get all of your little points lined up, as Gary was mentioning. And it's easy enough when you start doing it. I actually find these easier than some 3-tab shingles or some others where you're trying to find a cut, follow a cut line. But it's important that you try and get as exact in lining them up, because if you get some that are off, once the whole roof is done, they'll kind of stand out. Now, once you have it all shingled, before you cut out your ridge cap, I went down the back, the middle of it with the back of my X-Acto blade, and that scores it. And I did it before I cut it out so that it wouldn't squirm on me while I was doing it. And then once I had it scored, you can fold along that score. And to put on the ridge cap, you need to have a 90-degree angle right here. And I just use my flat square for doing that. So you have two 45-degree angles, and you want to make sure that they line up. And then again, I just use the canopy glue, and you glue those down, making sure that your four corners are going to meet up at the top. And that's easy enough if you let it overhang. You can cut that off afterwards. So this is where you line up your 4 points or your 4 corners. And of course, if you want to do anything extra, like put some type of pin there or something for a lightning rod or an antenna or something, you can do that. Now, once you have your roof done, you're going to glue it on top of the tower. And I use my tacky glue for that. I just put a bead all the way around on 4 sides, and then that holds it down. Now, set that aside to dry, and I test fit the roof onto my building. I wanted to just make sure it fit okay, and I'm glad I did that before I put the shingles on it. One thing I ran into on the S-scale kit, and I can't say whether it's going to be the same on any of the other 3 scales that they're available in, but the tabs that stuck up from the end walls were too tall, and they came through the roofing material. And if I had shingled over that, it wouldn't work. So it's easy enough to fix. I just marked a line at the top of the roof. And then since the walls were glued together, I laid it down, put a little piece of wood underneath it, and just sliced it off. It wasn't a problem, but I'm glad I found it before I was shingling the roofs. That would have made it a little more difficult. And now the tab sits flush with the roof. So we're going to start working on the main roof now. The first thing I did was paint the underside of the roof just a gray, which generally matched the gray of the building. And I first glued down my starter strip like I did with the tower roof. And then I started gluing down the shingles, again, lining up the points. Now, when you start cutting your shingles out of the sheet, you'll notice that the way they're laser cut, every other one is upside down. And as you cut them out, these are the 2 ends you're left with. And when you're putting them on the roof, you want to alternate these 2 ends. And you'll see here what I mean. You'll have one end and then the other type of end. And if you start at one end with the diamond points lining up, they line up at the other side too. I'm sure Jeff must have done this on purpose. I couldn't have been this lucky. So you just continue laying down a bead of glue and then the next row of shingles and a bead of glue and the next row of shingles, alternating your ends. And that way you don't have any that are hanging off either too far and they end up too short on the other end. Now, once you start working your way up here to these openings, you're going to shingle over the tab slots. And this is our opening for the tower. And this is the last row that will glue all the way across. Now for this next row, you're going to lay down a bead of glue, and these shingles are going to straddle the opening. But you have to do this little extra step. I put a spot of glue on the bottom of all the shingles that we're going to lay down right here. And that's because these shingles need to stay in place once you cut out the opening for the tower after you're done. This is where the tower opening is going to be cut out. And these shingles need to stay here. And if you didn't glue them down, they're just going to fall away when you cut this out. This is what it looks like from the back. So once you've done that, you continue gluing them the rest of the way up. The rest of these shingles, you don't need to put any glue on the backs of them. They're just going to be cut out. So once I had shingled all the way up to the top, this is where you cut out for the opening for the tower and save all these. You'll see why later. And this is why we put glue underneath those shingles, was so they wouldn't fall out or just be held by a tiny little strip here and be loose. Now, once you've got your roof shingled all the way up to the top, you want to cut off the ends. And I use a scalpel for it. It makes a nice clean cut. And you can see how it comes right down the edge here. And by starting on the point of the diamond, they all line up. And this is when I had both of the roofs shingled and the openings cut out. And it doesn't pick up as much in the photo, but the variation in the shingles from the earlier painting really shows up. And you want to remember to cut out the hole for your chimney, but don't accidentally cut out the hole for your tabs. While I was letting all that dry, I moved on to the base. Now, the base of this kit, you can see the slots. That's where the walls are going to sit. So I used 2 shades of gray, and I just kind of alternated them and moved them back and forth as I was painting it. It's not how I would do concrete if it was going to be really seen, but on mine, only the very edge of this is going to be seen once it's done. Now, if your doors are going to be open or you're going to do an interior for it or something, you might want to spend a little more time with your concrete. Now, going back to the roof, once they've all dried, you're going to get ready to install your roof. Now, since mine was going to be a demo model, I did a couple extra strengthening things that you won't need to do if you're building it just to put on a layout. But this is going to be handled a lot. So underneath the piece of roofing, I glued a brace down just to make it stronger. And then when I was test fitting the roof on here, I noticed that I wanted it to have a really strong attachment along the edge here and not just on the 2 end walls. And even though we had raised this wall a little bit, I wanted a glue block along this bottom as well that the roof would be glued to. So if somebody was handling it at a show, it wouldn't come loose. So I just took some long strip wood, I cut it and then sanded it down so it fit right inside my 2 end walls. And I glued it in place like this, just at the right angle so I could glue the wall to it. And what you see here is me gluing the first roof in place. I put glue along the glue block on the other side, plus on both ends. And then I put the roof flat on the mat and used these weights to hold this glue block down in place while the glue was drying. And then this is doing the same thing on the second side, except I had to do it from the inside. But these are holding the building flat and against the roof that's on the mat there. So I let this dry in both sides and I got a really strong joint. So at this point, the roof's glued on. As I said, you don't necessarily have to go through these steps. I did it because this is going to be handled a lot. If it was just going to be sitting on a layout, I might have braced the roof, but I wouldn't have gone through these extra steps of the glue blocks. I also took a little leftover strip wood, I think it was 1/4 inch, and just glued inside the 2 openings or the 2 places where the roof peak is here, again, just to make it stronger. Now we're getting ready to put our ridge cap on now, and that's going to go along the ridge here. And this is the piece that's left. So we're going to cut it out. I roughly cut it into 2 pieces that were a little longer than I needed on both of these. Doing the same thing we did for the tower roof, I scribed right down the middle of it and then folded it in half. I like to fold it over a razor blade. It gives you a nice sharp edge. But when you go to put it on, you can see that our shingles don't come up quite high enough. And I thought this might be the case when I was actually shingling the roof, but I couldn't tell at the time. That's why I saved all of these little pieces. Because what you need to do, and you can do this while the roof's still flat and you're shingling it, you need to take these and cut most of the upper part off. So all you're left with are the little shingles and a very thin strip. And then put a little dab of glue on the back of each one of them. And then you're going to glue those down, again, lining up the points so that they go all the way across. And you can see how if I had left that on, it would actually stick up too high. So that's why we have to cut most of the back of the shingle off. And once we've done that, now our ridge cap comes down and the shingles are underneath it. And if it were to rain, everything would be protected. So again, just as we did with the ridge caps on the tower, I put glue down it, and then I use one of these little micro brush applicators to spread the glue out and glue it in place on the roof. And you can cut it to length before you put it on, or wait until it's in place and then cut it to length. Now, the last thing we have to do is glue the tower in place. And for doing this, I put glue on the inside of the opening on both sides. But if you push the tower down, you want it to be as tight as possible here. The thing to remember, the inner walls of this tower go through the hole, and that's what the glue is adhering to. This outer wall has the V cut in it, but we want this to be a really tight joint once we have the shingles on the roof. Now, you can't put a weight on top of this tower while it's drying because it's pointed at the top. So what I did, I inverted it. The point of the tower is resting on the mat, and I have the weight of the building resting on the tower, and these two blocks are just supporting it so it doesn't tip over either way. And that way, it's pushing down on the tower as the glue is drying, and it ended up being a really tight joint there between the wall and the shingles. So that's it for putting the roof on. We're just about done with this. Next week, we'll go over the last details of putting on the porch roof, mounting the front doors, painting and putting on the chimney, and mounting it on the base, and then doing the weathering. So Jim, back to you.